And he's still like making this face almost like he's jealous of this relationship that's developing between Sherlock and Alice. Okay, so welcome back to my channel. I'm going to continue on with my recap of Netflix, The Irregulars, Season 1, Episode 5, Student of the Unhallowed Arts. Okay, so this episode opens with Patricia Jones, of all people, right? So if you don't remember her character, she was in the, I believe, Ipsissimus episode where she was trying to basically kill Jessie for her powers. So it's a flashback of her. She's, you know, it's in the wee hours of the night. She's walking down the street and she come upon this group that of men and women that's just standing around. And of course, she's kind of put off and she's trying to figure out what's going on. And
what's going on?
And they all turn to look at her, and then you see Watson and Alice being Bea and Jessie's mother, run up to save her.
Patricia, come and go! Come with me if you want to live.
And so they end up, you know, grabbing her, and of course the people gave chase, and they were able to barricade themselves into a building of sorts, or I don't know if that was a building or just an alleyway where they had the gate that they were able to lock. And she ended up Alice ended up touching one of the people, and she had this flash, and she ends up telling Watson that we need to find Sherlock. So it gives you the impression that his life is in danger.
Oh God, we need to get to Sherlock.
So we flash to Sherlock, and he is in. It's not a theater, I guess. I mean, it's like a dinner theater kind of place where, you know, there's the stage and, you know, people are sitting at the tables, you know, eating and, you know, they have their drinks. And so this woman walked out on stage and, you know, she started talking about how some of the, actors and actresses have gone missing or, you know, have been killed in that area, and so this is supposed to be a tribute to them. And so she starts singing this song, and right away you kind of see the audience kind of looking like they're in this hypnotic state. And so the people end up standing up, and she eventually points out Sherlock and asks him to come to the stage.
Sherlock Holmes, join me on stage.
And of course he went to the stage, and she said something to him, I believe, and then she said something to the effect of, I want you to do something for me. And of course he's saying, you know, basically saying I'll do whatever you want, because he's under whatever this spell is. Similar to the hordes of people who were waiting for Patricia and gave chase without any rational or, you know, any cause or reason that was mentioned. And so she pulled this pin out of her hair and told him that she wanted him to kill himself. And so just as he had the pin to his neck, Watson and Alice and Patricia, they bust into the place. And then you find out that he was playing all along. He had earplugs in, and he had figured out what was going on, how she was hypnotizing the people.
I'm sorry, but I haven't the faintest idea what you just said.
And so he was able to inject her with something that incapacitated her. And of course, Alice and Watson trying to figure out, okay, so how were you able to figure out what was going on? Okay, and then we flash to present day. Well, Bea remember, she saw him. He was drunk and basically damn near passed out at her mother's gravesite. And so she ends up helping him to a room that's owned by Mrs. Hudson. And I don't know why she thought she was going to get anything out of him. He ends up throwing up and basically passing out. And of course that was it for the night. So the next morning, you know, Bea is still trying to figure out like what's going on with Leo, and she's talking to him, and she's still trying to figure out, well, I guess they all trying to figure out like what happened to him, where did he come from, did he get beat up, did he, you know, how did he sustain these injuries? And you know, he started talking about how, you know, where he was, the people didn't want him to leave, and so they were trying to keep him there, and so he ran.
Where I was, the people there didn't want me to leave. So I ran.
And that's pretty much all that he could say. And of course, that was off-putting to her. And she, you know, basically told him that she had some other things that she needed to do, and she got up and left. But of course, you know, he knows that eventually, young Leo, you're going to have to eventually explain yourself. Okay. So B went back to talk with Sherlock, and he started going into some of his background about how he was the youngest person hired to consult with Scotland Yard, and how him and Watson met when they were initially just housemates, and there was this one particular case that they worked on, and they, were successful in that, and so that's when they decided to form their business partnership. And he said, and basically he was saying that things were going well until, that a change happened, and they were basically trying to find out what was going on and what was causing this change. There was this feeling that something dark was coming to London, and so they set out to investigate and find out what that was.
A darkness came to London, and just like you and your friends, we were trying to find out why.
And so he did end up revealing that, and this is in a flashback, so it's going to be going back and forth. So in the flashback, he was talking about how him and Watson were on their way to meet with a woman who we now know to be Alice. And he talked about, as they were walking, he talked about how Mycroft recommended her because of her abilities, and we do know, obviously, from the Ipsissimus episode where he talks, Mycroft talked about how he works for an organization that investigate, this type of activity. And so, but it's never explained how he found her. But nevertheless, he recommended them to recruit her to help them.
Besides, according to Mycroft, she has the gift.
And so, this is where they came. So they end up coming upon the shop that she worked at. Sherlock went in, and the first person you saw was this little girl who was, was a toddler. And so you heard a woman in the back calling out to Beatrice. So this is when Sherlock first saw Beatrice. Of course, she was just a baby, so she wouldn't remember this.
Hello there. What's your name then?
Beatrice.
And so Alice came from the back, and initially, she tried to make it seem like Beatrice wasn't her daughter, but his powers of deduction, and he decided to basically go through this whole thing about, her being there, and how he could smell breast milk and all and how he knows that she's his daughter, and the fact, and he can understand why she would, not be upfront about that, because he doesn't see a wedding ring on her finger. And of course, during this time, even now, but more so then, unwed mothers were pretty much outcast. So she basically said, "Are you here about the Rat Man?" And so she was like, I guess this is the case that they're investigating at this point. And so he was like, "What do you know about the Rat Man?" And so she was like, "Well, you're not the only person that's gifted." And you can kind of see that he was kind of taken in by her.
You're here about the Rat Man.
How do you know about the Rat Man?
Oh, you're not the only one who's gifted, Mr. Holmes.
So B ends up going back to the cellar. Jessie is there, and B is excited because she's like, Sherlock is talking. He's talking about Mom. You need to come in here. And Jessie was pretty kind of off. She was like, she wasn't really in a hurry to go and meet him for whatever reason. And she basically decided that she was going to stay there. She feels like, she needs to rest, and hopefully at some point, during one of her dreams / nightmares, the rip will be revealed, and they'll be able to find it and figure out how to close it. And so that was her rationale, and she just decided to stay in the cellar. And so B ends up leaving, and Jessie ends up turning in for the night. So B ends up leaving the cellar to go back, I guess, I'm assuming, to continue talking to Sherlock. And as she was leaving, you can kind of see Spike and Billy sitting off to the side. And he saw her, he was just watching her come and go. And then Spike started talking to him about how, he needs to get back out there. And he saw these women. I don't know if these were women of the night or just, women who were just out and just lived in the area. But he is basically trying to, talk him, his friend, into putting himself back out there.
You need to get back in the game, son. Pronto. Before your dick hands in his resignation.
And so he ends up pushing him to the point where he got up to walk over to talk to these young ladies. And just before he made it to them, this man bumps into him out of nowhere, and it ends up saying something snarky to him.
Hi guys, I'm Bill. Watch where you're going.
And you can kind of tell by his facial expression that he recognized this man.
Sorry, I just...
And so he started after this man, and this man, he ends up vanishing in the crowd. So we go back, flashback, it's another flashback of Sherlock putting this tattoo on Alice's ankle.
Oh, you said it wouldn't hurt, you lying bastard!
And then, you know, after they do that, now they're trying to coax Watson into getting a tattoo. And of course, he was like, "No, you know, I'm good. I don't want to do it." And eventually, it looks like they end up talking him into it. When you flash back to present day, when he's talking to B, he was like, "Oh, he said he would, but then he chickened out." And and of course, B was like, "Well, that sounds like him." So that was funny. So there was another flashback of them. This is after they left the theater, after, I guess, the woman, I guess, getting her under control, and not sure where they took her, but they're now back, I guess, at their meetup spot, their office, whatever this place is. And they, meeting up with, I guess, the other members of their group. And so Alice is, she's kind of sitting far off because she's the only woman in this. So it's like 7 men. And that's including Watson and Sherlock. And so, of course, they're asking him, like, how did you figure out, how did you find out that it was her? And, initially he said something to the effect, I was just lucky, I guess, or something to that effect.
How on earth did you know that it was her song that was hypnotizing people?
Yeah. Luck, I suppose.
And then, he went into details of how he, figured out that it was the woman. So while he was talking to the group, Allison, slipped out. Now, she was able to slip out, so the other guys didn't notice, but because Sherlock was standing up talking, he was facing in her direction. He saw her as she was leaving. And he stopped her just before she left. And he was like, well, we have a room set up for you upstairs. And she was like, and he said, I thought that, Beatrice is okay with the babysitter. And so, she started talking to him like she really didn't care for his arrogance.
Do you ever get bored of showing people how brilliant you are?
She ends up telling him that she thinks that there's something really big that's going to happen. Basically, she can't really pinpoint what's going on.
I think we are standing on the brink of something that doesn't have order or reason.
And basically, she doesn't care for his showboating, and they go back and forth a little bit.
Your arrogance has led you to believe that you are a giant.
And then they end up kissing. And so Watson ends up coming out, I guess, to get him to bring him back into the meeting, and he saw them kissing. And Watson's reaction was strange. I'm kind of, it's kind of up in the air, like, what exactly is Watson's attachment to Sherlock? Like, I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, because that was his reaction. He didn't say anything. He kind of just saw them and kind of stared a little too long. And then he backs out of the room and he went back to join the other men. And so the men were still talking, and they flashed to Watson, and he's still like making this face, almost like he's jealous of this relationship that's developing between Sherlock and Alice. And so we flash back to the present, and Sherlock did admit to loving her, being in love with Alice. And Beatrice got upset. It's like, well, if you loved her, how could you do this? And we have your book, and we read about the experiments that you performed on her, and we heard about the screaming, and he's saying that it's not what you think, and basically the screaming was her having nightmares. And so she can then flashback, if you basically in comparison to Jessie. And so that's what that was about. It wasn't like that they were hurting her or experimenting on her. It was what it was. So we flash to Jessie. She's now asleep, and she's now back in the cave, and she's looking around, and of course she got all of these the auditory stuff that's going on, and she's kind of searching, and she found this crate of something. I don't know if it was like filled with skeletons or something to that effect. So one of I guess a zombie. ends up grabbing her ankle and pulling her down, so she ends up slipping on the ground. And then they started coming from all different directions and grabbing and holding her, and they kept saying circle, circle, circle. And of course she ends up touching her wrist and she wakes up. She woke up outside, so she's now outside in the alley screaming and kicking and, you know, and punching and fighting. And then of course B runs up and just trying to figure out, okay, how did you get out here? Are you sleepwalking again? And
Jess! What are you doing out here?
She was still trying to get her to go and meet and talk with Sherlock, and she was like, she just was not ready to deal with that. And basically how she just wants to be alone. So she's going through something right now. There's, you know, she's having this aversion to meeting this guy. So after the whole incident with Billy, he kind of walked off, and Spike ends up finding him in the pub, and he's kind of sitting by himself with his pint, and you can see that he's deep in thought. So Spike ends up going over to talk to him, and initially Billy wasn't trying to really forthcoming with what was going on with him, why, what just happened. And so he eventually admitted that the guy that he saw was named Vic Collins, I believe, and he was master of the workhouse, and he was responsible for the abuse that he and B and Jesse suffered.
It was a guy called Vic Collins. He was the master of the workhouse when me and the girls were there.
And he made the comment about how, one day he's going to get his. And so Spike interjected some logic and reason into the conversation. It's like, yeah, and whoever's dumb enough to do that is going to be captured and, basically jailed or murdered, or, not murdered, but killed, or, it's just not going to be good. Basically, he's telling Billy, I would leave that alone. Just leave that alone. Like, I don't want, he doesn't want Billy to do something he's going to regret. And so Billy ends up getting up to go get Spike a drink. So B is now back in the cellar, and Leo is, I guess, trying to get himself together, but you can see he's all battered and bruised, and, she's still trying to ask questions, and, he's basically telling her that I don't want you to see me like this. And so she walked away for a minute so he could put his shirt on. And then they started talking, and then she said something about a conversation they had about dancing, and she asked him if he could dance, and then she started singing the song, and they started dancing, and he went in to kiss her, and he ends up saying, why do you feel so uncomfortable, or why are you so scared to be around me? And she said something to the effect about, why are you afraid to let me see you with your shirt off?
Why are you so scared of letting me close?
Why are you so scared of me seeing you without a shirt on?
And of course, once again, he doesn't really have any, answer. And so she basically is like, you know what? I have some other things to do. And she ends up leaving again. So now, so B is back over in the room with Sherlock, and he's telling her about the last case they worked on. And, as they were going to investigate, you saw Sherlock and Alice, they were talking, and Alice is basically saying that, it's something different about this case, and
there's something different about this case, Sherlock.
Basically it has, he's asking her like different, like how, and she said, I don't know, but I think it has something to do with John, and
I don't know, something to do with John.
No problem here.
Of course, that makes you flash back to Mycroft when he was saying that if there is a rip, then you can best believe that John is going to be nearby. Okay, so they end up going into the room, and the guy is explaining the case. The case is called The Case of the Collector. And so you have these group of men that have had limbs basically taken, arms, legs, hands, whatever, you name it. And so while they were looking at the men and talking to the men, Alice ends up finding this vial that contained this green liquid. So we flash back to the house, their home. Sherlock is trying to determine what this liquid is, and he thinks that he has figured it out. And there's a voiceover of him talking about how, they were all exhausted, and, how, you could see him, you saw him snort something several times, so you can see his drug addiction is increasing at this point. And basically, he wasn't at the top of his game, and he had to admit that. And so he ends up asking Watson to go down to the botanical gardens to ask them about this particular plant that he believes to be the key ingredient in this liquid that can only be found in a specific place.
It's base is alcohol. The rest is an extraordinary blend of herbs and flora.
And Watson was basically, he didn't want to go. He's like, we're exhausted, we need to rest. And of course, Sherlock is like, no, you need to, I need you to go and find out what this is. And so he comes back, and basically they said that it's not the plant that he think it is, it's some other plant. And he, Sherlock doesn't want to hear this, and he's now frustrated. And
it's not Snowdonia hawkweed, it's common tarragon.
It can't be tarragon, it looks nothing like it. Can you take it back and get them to
Sherlock!
Watson is like, well, why don't we go down to the bar and just have a drink like we used to? And he was like, well, no, because I can't leave Alice. And so we flash back to present day, and you can see that at this point Sherlock is going through serious withdrawals. And so he ends up asking B he's like, I know a place that you could go to get me, something.
Oh, please, can you give me something? Something to take the edge off a little.
And she basically said no, and he basically said that if you don't get whatever this, this drug is, opioid or opium or something, that I'm not saying anything else. And she basically at this point had ran, she left and slammed the door, like she's not doing it.
Give me something, or you under another way, enemy! Another way!
So then you flash to Billy. He's following Vic Collins, and so he followed him and found out where he lived. So when he said he was going to get Spike a drink, he actually slipped out of the bar to see if he could catch up with Vic Collins, which he did. And so he followed him all the way home. And when Billy turned around, he saw Spike. So Spike was following Billy, who was following Vic. And so Spike is basically trying to figure out, okay, what is going on here? What are you doing? Basically, I thought we already talked about this, and you don't need to do this. Basically, still trying to stop him from being a hothead and doing something he's going to regret. And then Billy ends up revealing that the stories that he told him about, being beaten and having his jaw broken and all that stuff, he said, it didn't happen to me. That's what Vic Collins did to B.
About the beatings, breaking my jaw, put me in the hospital. It wasn't me. It was B.
And of course, Spike feels some kind of way, but he still is trying to talk some sense into his friend. And of course, Billy is like, he feels guilty because at the time he was just a kid. He was powerless. I'm not sure who's older between him and B, but basically he was a child and he wasn't able to stand up to her. And so now he's feeling like he's an adult. He's bigger. He's strong, and he feel like he can now avenge his friend. And Spike is just like Billy is gone. Like he has in his head that he wants to be the person to make Vic Collins pay. So we flash back to B and Sherlock, and she ends up, she had this package. She was saying that she's not going to give it to him until he tells her more information about their mom. And so she was like, well, why couldn't you leave her? And she's referring back to when, Watson wanted to go down to the bar, and he said, no, I can't leave Alice right now. And then, of course, you flash to her, and you see that she's pregnant.
I think I need the midwife.
And this is when you find out that Sherlock is actually Jesse's father.
You must have guessed.
I needed you to say it.
And so you saw Jessie standing in the doorway, so now she's there, and she know that, he's her father. And so Sherlock ends up apologizing, and Jessie ends up saying to him that, I don't care about your apology. I don't really want your apology. I want to know about my mother's nightmares.
I don't want an apology from you. All I want is for you to tell me what my mum saw in her nightmares.
And so he ends up telling them that her nightmares were always about an executioners from the 17th century and triangles. And so, of course, you flash to Alice, and of course, it's similar nightmares to Jessie. The only difference is Alice, her nightmares were in the woods, and you heard someone screaming out triangles, whereas Jessie, hers was in this cave, and you hear them saying circles, circles all over again.
Executioners and triangles.
So at this point, Jessie is born, And Alice had enough, pretty much. She wanted to leave London. She felt like something terrible was going to happen, and, you know, she just wanted her family to be safe. And initially, you know, Sherlock was like, imagine if we could crack this case. You know, he's stuck on being able to solve this riddle. Like, you know, we know this is who part of his character, where it's this obsession of his solving what people consider to be the unsolvable, right? And so she ends up looking at him and saying, I knew, you know, this was not about solving a case. This is not about, you know, these other things. This is about basically glory for yourself.
Imagine what people will think if we can save the entire world.
I should have known.
And, you know, I remember you saying that the only people that's afraid are people that have something to lose. This was part of the conversation he had the night that she tried to slip out of the meeting. And, at the time, he said he was basically insinuating that he doesn't have anything to lose. And so now she's saying that you have me, you have Jesse, you have B, you have a lot to lose at this point. And so the next scene you saw Sherlock packing and saying that they were leaving town. And of course Watson is feeling some kind of way, and he's like, well, Allison, you know, is putting you up to this. And then he starts going into this research that he's been doing, and how it seemed like everything goes, if she's been, you know, dreaming about these executioners, then maybe it has something to do with gallows. And of course Sherlock was like, well, that's good, why didn't you tell me you were doing this research? And then Watson is saying that, you know, I would just wanted you to be impressed by me. So obviously Sherlock's opinion matters a lot to him.
I wanted you to be impressed by me. I wanted you to see me. I see you, John.
And so of course Watson was like, well, it's just a theory at this point, because they're doing research. There are several gallows, but the thing that stands out is that she keeps dreaming about the executioner, but she's also dreaming about triangles. So he was like, well, it has to be a gallows that's shaped like a triangle. And so they started talking. He had to make a difficult decision. He ends up convincing Alice to go with him, and so she did. And while Sherlock and Watson were looking at something, she saw an executioner, like she was having some type of waking dream or something, I guess. And so they end up following her into the woods, and they end up finding a rip.
The very fabric of the universe.
And so she ends up walking over to the rip, and the rip is, you know, trying to pull her in. Of course, Sherlock is trying to hold on to her to pull her away from it. And so he said, you know, this is Sherlock telling the story, and then to Beatrice and Jesse. And he's saying that he begged Watson to grab Alice, but Watson ended up pulling Sherlock away, and the rip ends up sucking Alice in, and it closed. So once it sucked her in, it closed.
I shouted at John to save her, but he grabbed me instead.
So at this point, I think at this point Jesse left, and B is still there. Of course, they're pissed off because they're like, she wanted to leave, and you convinced her to go. And then he started talking about. He apologized, you know, again. But then he said, I did love her, and I, you know, basically said that he wasn't the one that killed her. And then he started, you know, saying that he's questioning Watson. And he basically was saying how, you know, throughout most of his life, Watson has been unremarkable, and now all of a sudden he was able to do research and find out where this rip is. And so you kind of see, you know, he's questioning Watson's motives at this point.
John Watson is the type of man who's lived his whole life without ever being touched by the hand of inspiration. So how come he was suddenly graced with the insight that led us to the rip?
And so B was about to leave, and he ends up saying, okay, you know, because he's, you know, waiting for her to give him the drugs. And then she ends up saying, well, it's sugar. So she basically conned him. And so of course he got pissed off, and he was like, you B, and don't come back. I don't ever want to see you again. Because at this point, you know, he's not in his right mind. He's in pain, and, you know, he's physical and mental pain. He's going through withdrawals from this drug. So Billy ends up going back to Vic Collins' house. He ends up breaking in somehow. You see Collins sitting in his chair in front of the fireplace, and it was almost like he was expecting Billy. And so Billy was standing behind him. He never turned around. At this point, he hadn't turned around, and he's saying, "So why are you just standing there?
What are you hesitating for, boy?"
And he started talking to Billy, and of course Billy's telling him how upset he is, and how how he was violent, and then he was like, "Oh, you must be a kid from the workhouse," and I did what I thought, I did what was best, because kids need discipline, and then he kind of looked over at Billy, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I remember you." And of course, Billy's like, "How could you possibly remember me out of 100 of children that, have gone through the workhouse?" And then he says, "Oh yeah, your mother came down from Glasgow." And of course, Billy's like, "No, because that's not the story that he was told." And he was saying how your mom, basically gave you away because she didn't want you. And of course, this is getting Billy really upset. And it's like, "No, my mother was this person, and then my dad died in the war." And then he had to tell Billy, he was like, that war happened in this particular year, which was so many years ago. And so he said, although I know, he said something to him, but I know that you can count. And so they'll start to make Billy think. And he's like, your mother was from Glasgow. She was a prostitute. And of course, this is pissing her off. It's pissing him off even more. And he ends up saying, "So since you claim to know me, then who am I? Then what's my name?" And he ends up telling him, "Your name is Billy."
What's my name? Vic.
Billy.
So he wasn't lying. He was like, because he did say, I never forget a name or a face. And then he was like, "You used to hang out with those two sisters." And so now Billy is standing there stunned, because he's coming to the realization that, okay, what he's telling him is true about his parentage. And Billy, it was like Billy, who felt like he was this tough guy who was going to finally get revenge for B. It was like almost like he was this little kid again back in the workhouse, and Vic Collins was this monster that terrified him all over again. And so Vic ends up telling him, "You need to leave my house before I give you something to cry about."
Get out of my house, little Bill, or I'll really give you something to cry about.
And so Billy ends up, he just left the house. So it's the following day, and she goes back to talk to Sherlock. It seems like he's doing better. And they talked, and it really wasn't a whole lot. He basically, it seemed like they left on a decent note. I mean, at this point, it wasn't like he was cussing her out, fussing her out, and she wasn't running out slamming doors at this point. But they were cordial. But he did tell her before she left that, his life has been hell all these years without Alice, and he did reiterate how much he loved her, and that he would go through it all over again just for one more day with her. And he basically was telling her that life and love is not supposed to be painless, and basically you have to make that leap, that sacrifice. And so the next scene, you saw her, she's back in the cellar, and she walks over to Leo, who's still on his little pallet, still trying to mend his little body. And then she ends up asking him to take his shirt off, and so he ends up taking his shirt off so she could really see like the extent of his injuries. And then they end up kissing. And you got from that they spent the night together. And that is how this episode ends. So this video is going to be long enough as it is. So I'm going to end this here, and I will talk to you guys later.